Most people saw a drunk at table 6. I saw a man whose heart had already stopped. He was a Navy SEAL, a ghost of a war we aren't supposed to know about, and he was dying in the middle of a Friday night rush. I had 4 minutes to pull him back from the ledge or watch the secrets in his chest die with him. Table 6 wasn't a dinner reservation. It was a battlefield, and the first shot had already been fired. The shift at Providence Medical Center had ended 3 hours ago, but for Ava Sterling, the hospital never truly stayed behind the sliding glass doors. It followed her in the phantom beeping of the telemetry monitors that echoed in her ears like a persistent ghost. That was the curse of 12 years in the ICU. You could scrub the scent of betadine and antiseptic from your skin until it was raw. You could trade the navy blue scrubs for jeans and a leather jacket, but you couldn't scrub the adrenaline out of your blood. Ava sat in a corner booth at the Copper Grill, a high-end steakhouse in downtown Seattle where the air smelled of seared ribeye, aged bourbon, and the kind of expensive lies people tell on first dates. Around her, the restaurant was a roar of Friday night energy, the clatter of silver on porcelain, the booming laughter from the mahogany bar, and the sizzle of butter on cast iron platters. To anyone else, it was a sanctuary. To Ava, it was too loud, too bright, and far too fragile. She was 34, but the fine lines at the corners of her eyes suggested she'd seen more lifetimes end than most people see begin. She swirled a glass of Pinot Noir, watching the condensation drip down the side like slow, cold tears. She was supposed to be on a date, a setup by her sister, Emily, who was convinced Ava's soul was withering away under the fluorescent lights of the trauma bay. The guy was 30 minutes late. Honestly, Ava was relieved. She didn't have the soul energy left to explain why she flinched when a busboy dropped a tray of glasses, or why she subconsciously checked the jugular veins of everyone she spoke to. She was just about to signal the waitress, a college girl named Sarah who looked like she was drowning in her section, to ask for the check when the heavy oak door swung open. A draft of freezing November air sliced through the warmth of the restaurant, and then he walked in. He was impossible to miss. He stood 6'3", with shoulders that seemed to pull the fabric of his dark charcoal Henley tight across his chest. He moved with a terrifying precision, a walk that wasn't just a walk, but a calculation of space and balance. He looked like a man who had earned every square inch of the ground he stood on. But Ava didn't see a handsome stranger. She saw the minute tremor in his left hand as he reached for the hostess stand. She saw the sheen of cold sweat on his forehead that the restaurant's heating hadn't caused. His skin wasn't flushed from the Seattle wind. It was pallid, with a waxy, gray undertone that screamed decreased perfusion to her trained eyes. "Table for one," the man rasped. His voice was tight, like a wire about to snap. The hostess, a teenager more interested in her Instagram feed than the dying titan in front of her, grabbed a menu. "Right this way, sir." They sat him at table 6. It was a high-visibility spot right in the center of the room, flanked by a raucous birthday party and a table of loud businessmen in suits. "Stop it," Ava told herself, gripping her wine glass until her own knuckles turned white. "You are off duty. You are not a nurse tonight. You are just a woman waiting for a man who stood her up." But the instincts drilled into her over a decade of code blues and trauma alphas refused to power down. She watched him over the rim of her glass. He didn't look at the menu. He ordered a whiskey neat and a water. When they arrived, he didn't touch the liquor. He gripped the water glass so hard his hand shook. "Is he okay?" Sarah, the waitress, whispered as she hovered near Ava with a bread basket. She followed Ava's gaze to table 6. "That's Elias Thorne Holloway. He comes in once a month, tips like a king, but never says a word. The guys in the kitchen say he was a SEAL, special ops maybe. He looks different tonight." "He looks sick," Ava murmured, her voice flat. Elias Thorne took a sip of water and set the glass down with a heavy, uncoordinated clunk. He exhaled a ragged breath, his cheeks puffing out, and then he did it. He rubbed his left arm high near the shoulder and pressed a clenched fist into the center of his chest. Ava stood up before she even realized she'd moved. That was the Levine's sign, the universal, primal gesture of a heart under siege. "No," she whispered, "not here, not tonight." Elias closed his eyes, his neck muscles straining as he fought for air. Around him, the birthday party erupted in a chorus of happy birthday. The businessmen laughed at a crude joke. The noise was a physical wall, masking the silence of a man dying in the middle of the room. Elias' eyes snapped open. They were wide, steel blue, and completely unfocused. He looked directly at Ava, but he wasn't seeing a nurse in a steakhouse. He was seeing the darkness of the long sleep closing in. He reached for his glass, his fingers failing him. Smash! The heavy tumbler hit the floor, shattering into 1,000 diamonds of glass and water. The restaurant went stone-cold silent for a single heartbeat. "Whoa, easy there, big guy," one of the businessmen laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Little early for the floor, isn't it?" Elias didn't answer. He tried to stand, pushing off the table like a titan rising from the earth. He got halfway up, his massive frame trembling, and then his legs simply deleted themselves. He didn't stumble, he crashed. It was the sound of 300 pounds of dead weight hitting hardwood, a sickening, heavy thud that vibrated through the floorboards and into Ava's bones. He took the tablecloth, the silver, and the flickering candle down with him. A woman screamed. The panic began to rise like a tide. Ava Sterling didn't think. She didn't decide. She vaulted over the side of her booth, her wine glass forgotten, her life as a civilian stripped away in an instant. She sprinted the 15 feet to table 6, her boots skidding on the spilled water and whiskey. "Call 911, Ava's voice cut through the air like a gunshot. "Now, tell them we have a male down, unresponsive." The world was spinning into chaos, but as Ava hit her knees beside the fallen soldier, everything else vanished. There was only the smell of spilled bourbon, the harsh overhead lights, and the man whose life was currently leaking out onto the floor of a steakhouse. "Back up, give him room," she barked at the waiters who were hovering uselessly. She grabbed Elias' shoulder. It felt like a block of cold granite. "Elias, can you hear me?" She dug her knuckles into his sternum, a rub designed to cause enough pain to jumpstart a stalled brain. Nothing, not a flicker. She rolled him onto his back. His face was a mask of frozen agony, his lips already deepening into a terrifying shade of cyanotic blue-gray. Ava jammed 2 fingers against his carotid artery, right under the jawline. She held her breath. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Silence. "Code blue," she whispered, the hospital tongue taking over. "He's coded." The war for Table 6 had officially begun. At Table 6, time didn't just crawl, it stopped. I had 3 minutes to find a heartbeat in a man made of granite and secrets. But as I ripped open his shirt, I didn't just find scars. I found the roadmap of a war that was about to follow us home. If his heart didn't start beating, we were all dead. If it did, the nightmare was only just beginning. Ava's knees hit the hardwood with a jarring thud. The crowd at the Copper Grill was a blur of pale faces and glowing phone screens, but her focus was a laser beam directed at the chest of Elias Thorne. 12 years of ICU shifts had turned her into a machine that processed data in milliseconds. Data point 1, no carotid pulse. Data point 2, deep cyanosis in the nail beds and lips. Data point 3, no chest rise. "Call it in," Ava roared again, her voice cracking the paralysis of the room. "Code blue, tell the operator we have an adult male, traumatic arrest, table 6. She didn't wait for a response. She grabbed the collar of Elias Dark Henley and ripped. The fabric groaned and then gave way, pearl buttons skittering across the floor like tiny white shrapnel. As the shirt fell away, the restaurant collective gasped. Elias Thorne wasn't just a man. He was a living museum of violence. A jagged keloid scar ran down his right rib cage. A star-shaped pucker from a high-velocity round sat just below his collarbone. But Ava didn't have time to wonder what jungle or desert had carved those marks. She only saw the way his jugular veins were bulging, thick, ropey cords pulsating against the waxen skin of his neck. "Greg," she pointed at the businessman who had been laughing seconds ago. "Down here, now, interlock your hands, center of the chest. You're going to push until I tell you to stop, hard and fast, 2 inches deep. Think of the beat of staying alive and don't you dare stop." The man, Greg, looked like he was going to vomit. I can't, I'm an accountant," he stammered. "Then account for his life," Ava snapped, her eyes flashing with a predatory intensity that silenced him. "Push." Greg leaned in, his weight behind the first compression. Crunch. The sound of a rib yielding under the pressure echoed in the quiet room. Greg flinched, but Ava held his gaze. "That's the sound of life, Greg, keep going." While Greg pumped, Ava tilted Elias' head back, clearing the airway. She sealed her mouth over his and delivered 2 rescue breaths, but as she blew, she felt a terrifying resistance. It was like trying to inflate a concrete pillar. "Stop," Ava commanded. Greg collapsed back, panting. "Is he back?" Ava didn't answer. She pressed her ear to Elias' chest, ignoring the spilled whiskey soaking into her jeans. On the right side, there was a faint, distant wheeze. On the left, absolute, terrifying silence. She tapped his chest with her middle finger. Thump, thump. On the left, it didn't sound like a human body. It sounded hollow, like a drum. "Sarah, the AAD, where is it?" Ava screamed, looking up at the waitress. Sarah came sprinting back, her face streaked with tears. "The manager, he took it yesterday to get the battery replaced. We don't have it." A low moan of despair went through the patrons. Without a defibrillator, a coded patient in a restaurant was as good as buried. But Ava wasn't looking for a heartbeat anymore. She was looking at Elias' neck. His windpipe, the trachea, wasn't centered. It was being pushed, millimeter by millimeter, toward the right side of his throat. "It's not his heart," Ava whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "What?" Greg asked, wiping sweat from his eyes. "He's not having a heart attack," Ava announced to the room, her voice carrying a chilling authority. "He has a tension pneumothorax. His left lung has collapsed, but the air is trapped. It's building up pressure inside his chest cavity like a balloon about to burst. Every time you push on his chest, you're crushing his heart under that pressure. We're not saving him, we're strangling him from the inside out." "So what do we do?" someone shouted from the back. "The ambulance is 10 minutes out," another voice called from the door. "Traffic is a nightmare on 4th Avenue. Ava looked at Elias. His face was transitioning from gray to a deep, bruised purple. 10 minutes? He didn't have 90 seconds. His heart was being squeezed into a corner of his chest, unable to fill, unable to beat. "I have to pop the balloon," Ava said grimly. She stood up, her gaze sweeping the tables around her. She saw the silver steak knives lying in pools of gravy. Dull, serrated, filthy. "I need a sharp blade," she roared, the sound primal and raw. "A paring knife, a scalpel, anything with a straight edge, and I need alcohol, the highest proof you have. Vodka, gin, now." The restaurant staff froze, but the bartender, a man named Mike who looked like he'd seen his share of blood, was already moving. Ava knelt back down, her fingers tracing the second intercostal space on Elias' left side. the gap between the second and third ribs, mid-clavicular line, the safe zone, the kill zone. She was about to perform a needle decompression on a man who had survived a dozen wars, and she was going to do it without a needle. If she missed by a fraction of an inch, she'd sever the subclavian artery, and Elias Thorne would bleed out in front of 50 people before he ever took another breath. "Hang in there, Elias," she whispered, her hand trembling for a fraction of a second before the tunnel of the ER closed in. "This is going to hurt like hell, but I'm not letting you die at table 6. Mike the bartender slid onto his knees beside her, a silver tray in his hands. On it sat a paring knife wrapped in a linen napkin, a bottle of premium vodka, and a handful of black plastic cocktail straws. Ava's eyes locked on the tray. Then she saw it, the ballpoint pen in Greg, the accountant's shirt pocket. "Give me that pen," she demanded. "What? It's just a..." She snatched it. In one fluid motion, she unscrewed the cap, ripped out the ink cartridge and the spring, and threw them into the shadows. She was left with a 3-inch hollow plastic tube. "Drench it," she told Mike, nodding toward the vodka. As the smell of high-proof alcohol filled the air, Ava picked up the paring knife. She looked at Elias' face, the face of a warrior who deserved better than to die on a dirty floor. "Forgive me," she whispered. And then she drove the knife down. "I didn't have a surgical suite. I had a steakhouse floor. I didn't have a chest tube. I had a ballpoint pen. Driving a blade into a Navy SEAL's chest isn't medicine, it's a prayer." And as the air hissed out of his lungs, I realized the man I was saving was a target. Table 6 was about to become the epicenter of a conspiracy that didn't just want him dead. They wanted him erased. The blade of the paring knife was small, but in the dim, amber light of the copper grill, it gleamed like an executioner's axe. Ava's hand was a pillar of ice, dead still, fueled by a decade of high-stakes trauma. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the panicked manager who was shouting about liability and lawsuits. She only looked at the second intercostal space on the left side of Elias Thorne's massive chest. "Hold him," Ava commanded Mike the bartender. "If he flinches while I'm inside, I'll hit the lung or the heart. Grip his shoulders and don't let go, even if he screams." Mike nodded, his knuckles white as he braced the seal against the hardwood. Ava took a deep, centering breath. Inhale, exhale. She doused the area with the high-proof vodka, the sharp scent of alcohol momentarily masking the smell of seared meat and fear. She positioned the tip of the knife just above the third rib. "Forgive me, Elias," she whispered again. She pushed. The resistance of human skin is surprising to those who haven't felt it. It's tough, elastic, and stubborn, but Ava knew the exact amount of pressure required. Crunch. The sound of the blade breaking through the pleura, the thick lining of the chest, sent a shudder through everyone standing within 10 feet. Elias didn't scream. His body simply convulsed, a primal, subconscious reaction to the intrusion. Mike groaned under the strain of holding him down. Ava didn't hesitate. She twisted the blade 90 degrees, creating a small, vertical chimney in the chest wall. "Hiss!" It was the most beautiful sound Ava had ever heard. A violent, high-pitched rush of air exploded out of the incision, spraying a fine mist of blood onto Ava's face. It sounded like a semi-truck releasing its air brakes. The pressure that had been crushing Elias' heart, shoving his windpipe to the side, and suffocating his brain was finally being equalized. "The pen, now," Ava barked. She snatched the hollowed-out plastic barrel of the ballpoint pen from the tray. She jammed it into the track she had cut with the knife. The hissing continued through the tube, a steady whistle of escaping air. Is he breathing?" Sarah the waitress asked, her voice trembling. Ava didn't answer. She kept her fingers pressed against his carotid artery. For 5 agonizing seconds, there was nothing but the whistle of the pen. Then thump. A faint, stuttering vibration beneath her fingertips. Thump thump. Pulse is back, Ava shouted. His heart is filling again. Greg, get back over here. Give him 2 more rescue breaths through the mask I made. Use your hand to seal around the tube. The color began to change almost instantly. The terrifying purple-blue of his face receded, replaced by a ghost of a pale pink. Elias' chest began to rise and fall, not the desperate, shallow gasps from before, but a mechanical, rhythmic movement. The restaurant erupted, not in cheers, but in a collective, shaky exhale. People were sobbing, some were filming on their phones. Put those phones away, Ava roared, looking up with eyes that could freeze fire. This man is a veteran. Show some damn respect and give us space. She looked down at Elias. His eyes were still closed, but his body was no longer the heavy, limp weight of a corpse. He was fighting back. But as she leaned in to check the security of the pen tube, she noticed something she hadn't seen in the chaos. Tucked into the waistband of his jeans, partially hidden by his belt, was a small, encrypted burner phone. It was vibrating. Ava reached down and pulled it out. The screen was cracked, but the message was clear. It was a string of red text that flickered like a warning light. Extraction compromised. Cleaners on site. Neutralize the package at table 6. Ava's blood turned to liquid nitrogen. Cleaners, neutralize. She looked toward the front door of the restaurant. Through the frosted glass, she saw a black SUV pull up to the curb, disregarding the no parking sign. 2 men in tactical windbreakers stepped out. They weren't wearing the uniforms of the Seattle PD or the EMTs. They moved with the same predatory precision as Elias Thorne. The ambulance isn't here yet, Ava whispered to herself. What was that? Mike the bartender asked, wiping blood from his hands. Mike, Ava said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Close the kitchen entrance. Lock the back door, now. Why? The paramedics need to get in. Those aren't paramedics coming toward the door, Ava said, looking at the black SUV. She looked back at Elias. His eyes suddenly flickered. They didn't drift open, they snapped open. The steel-blue irises were piercing, instantly alert, and filled with a terrifying clarity. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the blood. He looked directly at the burner phone in Ava's hand. They're here, Elias rasped. His hand shot out, grabbing Ava's wrist with a grip that felt like a steel shackle. You have to get out of here. If you're with me, you're a target. I'm not leaving my patient, Ava said, her jaw setting, and I'm not letting them finish what that collapsed lung started. Elias struggled to sit up, the plastic pen still whistling in his chest. Give me the phone and find my jacket. Outside, the heavy oak doors of the copper grill creaked open. The 2 men walked in. They didn't look for a table. They didn't look at the hostess. Their eyes went straight to the center of the room, straight to the blood on the floor. Straight to table 6. I had just saved Elias Thorne's life with a ballpoint pen, but now I had to save him from the men who had come to finish the job. The 2 suits at the door weren't police, they were cleaners. And in a room full of witnesses, they were looking for a way to make us both disappear. Table 6 was no longer a triage center. It was a kill zone, and the only weapon I had was a tray of steak knives. Ava Sterling felt the shift in the room before she saw it. It was a hunter's instinct, sharpened by years of watching for the minute changes in a patient's vitals before they crashed. The 2 men at the door were dressed in charcoal overcoats that hung just a little too heavy on the right side. They didn't scan the menu, they scanned the exits. They didn't look at the crowd, they looked at the blood on Ava's hands. Mike, Ava whispered, her voice barely audible over the whistling of the pen in Elias' chest. "Do not let them see you lock that door, just move." The bartender, paralyzed by the sight of the newcomers, finally snapped into motion. He ducked behind the bar, heading for the service entrance. Elias' hand tightened on Ava's wrist. His grip was a vice, cold and iron-hard. His eyes, though glassy from the trauma, were locked on the lead man, a guy with a jagged scar through his left eyebrow. "Viper," Elias rasped. The word was thick with blood and history. "Who is he, Elias?" Ava leaned in, her nurse's brain already calculating the fastest way to drag 300 pounds of seal into the kitchen. "The end of the line," Elias managed to choke out. He reached for his waist, his fingers searching for a weapon that wasn't there. He looked at Ava, his expression a mix of agony and frantic warning. "The phone, get it out of here." Ava looked at the burner phone. The red text was still flickering, neutralized the package. The men in the overcoats began to move. They didn't run. They walked with a terrifying, calm purpose, parting the crowd like a shark through a school of tuna. Patrons were starting to realize something was wrong. The celebratory mood of the miracle save evaporated, replaced by a cold, prickling dread. "Hey, you can't be back here," the restaurant manager yelled, stepping into the path of the lead man. "The paramedics are on the way. We need this area." The man with the scarred eyebrow didn't even slow down. He placed a hand on the manager's chest and shoved. It wasn't a push. It was a professional displacement. The manager flew backward, crashing into a table of hors d'oeuvres. "Ava, get back," Greg the accountant yelled, finally showing a spark of courage. He stood up, shielding Ava with his soft suburban frame. "Who are you guys? You need to wait for the cops." The second man reached into his coat. He didn't pull a badge. He pulled a suppressed Glock 19. The sound of the slide racking was a death knell. "Everyone back in their seats," the man said. His voice was as dry as a desert bone. "Medical emergency is over. We are federal transport. We'll take the patient from here." "Like hell you will," Ava snapped. She stood up, her scrubs, now soaked in Elias' blood, making her look like a vengeful spirit. "I'm the ranking medical professional on site. This man is unstable. He has a tension pneumothorax and a makeshift chest tube. If you move him without a gurney and a pressurized seal, he dies in 30 seconds. That, the scarred man said, stepping over a broken chair, is the idea. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the tray Mike had left, the paring knife, the vodka, the steak knives. She grabbed the bottle of 100 proof vodka and the linen napkin. "Greg, get down," she screamed. In one fluid motion, she shoved the napkin into the neck of the bottle and struck the flickering candle from table 6 against the glass. The alcohol ignited with a whoosh of blue and orange flame. She didn't throw it at the men, she threw it at the floor between them. The high-end carpet, soaked in spilled whiskey and grease, went up like a flare. A wall of fire erupted, 5 feet high, separating the cleaners from table 6. The restaurant turned into a madhouse. People screamed, diving under tables, sprinting for the front exit, exactly what Ava needed. Chaos was the only cover they had. "Mike, the back," Ava yelled. The bartender appeared from the shadows of the kitchen, pushing a heavy, stainless steel food cart. "Get him on." Ava and Mike grabbed Elias' belt and shoulders. With a roar of effort that made the tendons in Ava's neck stand out, they hauled the seal onto the bottom rack of the cart. Elias groaned, his face contorting as the pen shifted in his chest, but he didn't lose consciousness. He knew the stakes. "Go, go." Ava shoved the cart toward the kitchen's swinging doors. "Zeb, zeb, zeb." 3 silenced rounds hissed through the wall of fire. One shattered a plate of ribs 6 inches from Ava's head. Another punched a hole through the stainless steel of the cart. They burst through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The line cooks were frozen, staring at the bleeding giant on the food cart. Out the back, the loading dock, Ava commanded. They sprinted past the industrial fryers and the walk-in freezer. Behind them, the kitchen doors flew open. The cleaners had ignored the fire. They were coming through the smoke, masks pulled over their faces, eyes cold and murderous. The van, Mike pointed to his beat-up Chevy parked near the dumpsters. The keys are in the sun visor. You're coming with us, Mike, Ava said, grabbing the handle of the cart. No, Mike said, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from the prep station. His face was set in a grim line. I'll slow him down. Get that soldier out of here, nurse. He's the only one who knows why they're burning this place down. Ava didn't have time to argue. She and Greg shoved the cart toward the van. As they slid Elias into the back, Ava heard the sound of a struggle in the kitchen, the heavy clang of metal on metal, followed by a grunt of pain. She jumped into the driver's seat, ripped the visor down, and fumbled the keys into the ignition. The engine turned over with a rough growl. Ava, Greg yelled from the back, pointing at the loading dock. Viper stood there, his suppressed pistol leveled at the windshield. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man doing a chore. Duck, Ava screamed. She slammed the van into reverse. Driving a getaway van while performing thoracic surgery isn't something they teach you in nursing school. With Viper's bullets punching through the metal and Elias' pulse fading into the gray, I realized we weren't just fleeing a crime scene. We were a rolling target. At 60 miles an hour, Table 6 had become a high-speed operating room, and if I let go of the tube for even a second, the truth would die with him. The Chevy van lurched as Ava slammed it into gear, the transmission groaning in protest. Behind her, in the cavernous, rust-scented back of the vehicle, Greg the accountant was huddled over Elias Thorne's massive, trembling frame. The pen, the chimney, was still whistling, a thin, haunting sound that competed with the roar of the rain against the roof. Hold him down, Greg, Ava shouted over her shoulder, her eyes darting between the rain-slicked mirrors and the dark road ahead. I'm trying, he's moving. Ava, he's waking up and he's fighting me. Greg's voice was borderline hysterical. Ava glanced at the rearview mirror. Elias wasn't just moving, he was entering a state of emergence delirium. His seal brain, starved of oxygen and flooded with the trauma of the attack, had reverted to pure combat survival. He didn't see a nurse or an accountant. He saw threats. Elias, look at me, Ava yelled, swerving the van around a stalled city bus. Elias' hand, a knotted club of muscle and scar tissue, shot up and gripped Greg's throat. The accountant let out a strangled wheeze. Elias, stop. Ava's voice was a whip-crack of authority, the same voice she used to command a chaotic trauma bay. It's Ava, Table 6. You're in a van, we are escaping. The recognition didn't hit him immediately, but the frequency of her voice, calm, sharp, and fearless, seemed to anchor him. His grip on Greg loosened. He slumped back against a stack of old tire jacks, his chest heaving. The pen hissed violently. They have the perimeter, Elias managed to gasp. His blue eyes were bloodshot, searching the darkness of the van. The bridge, don't go to the bridge. The hospital is across the bridge, Elias. You need a chest tube and a CT scan. No hospital, Elias rasped, a spray of crimson flecking his lips. They own the grid. You go to a hospital. We're both tagged and bagged by morning. Ava gripped the steering wheel so hard the plastic creaked. She was a nurse. Every fiber of her being was wired to get a patient to a level 1 trauma center. But as she looked in the side mirror, she saw the twin LEDs of a black SUV weaving through traffic behind them with terrifying efficiency. They weren't using sirens. They didn't need them. They were hunting. Greg, Ava said, her voice dropping into a deadly calm. Look in that toolbox under the bench. Find me some duct tape. And check the back. There should be a gallon of distilled water for the radiator. What for? I have to convert this pen into a water-seal drainage system, Ava said. If I don't, every time he takes a breath, he risks pulling air back into the pleural space. The lung will collapse again, and this time I won't be able to pop it. As the van hurtled toward the industrial district of SODO, Ava navigated with one hand, using the other to navigate the narrow alleys. She reached a dead end beneath a rusted overpass and killed the lights. The van slid into the shadows of a row of shipping containers. Move, Greg, Ava commanded, scrambling into the back. The interior of the van smelled of copper, sweat, and old oil. She knelt by Elias. He was shivering now, the early stages of shock. Elias, I need to fix your chest, she whispered. She took the distilled water jug Greg handed her, emptied half of it, and pushed a secondary tube, a piece of rubber fuel line Greg had found, into the water. She taped the other end to the ballpoint pen barrel still protruding from Elias' chest. The chimney was now an underwater seal. Every time Elias exhaled, bubbles flared in the water. When he inhaled, the water rose in the tube, preventing air from entering. It was crude, it was barbaric, and it was working. Ava, Elias reached out his hand, trembling. He didn't grab her this time. He placed something in her palm. It was a small metallic thumb drive, warm from being tucked against his skin. The General, the Ares project. It wasn't a failure, it was a harvest. They killed my team to cover the sales. We'll get it to the press, Elias. We'll get it to the FBI. Elias let out a dry, hacking laugh that ended in a wince. The FBI, who do you think, hired Viper? Suddenly, the world turned white. A high-intensity spotlight hit the back windows of the van. The glare was blinding. The sound of a heavy engine idling vibrated through the floorboards. Out of the vehicle, a voice boomed over a megaphone. This is Federal Marshal Service. Come out with your hands up. Are they the good guys? Greg whispered, his face pale in the searchlight. Ava looked at Elias. The SEAL was already reaching for a heavy tire iron on the floor, his face a mask of grim determination. He shook his head slowly. Marshals don't use private security spotlights, that's them. Duck, Ava screamed. The back window of the van vanished in a spray of safety glass. The sound of the suppressed shots was like the snapping of dry twigs. Thip, thip, thip. Ava scrambled back into the driver's seat. She didn't turn on the headlights. She slammed the van into drive and floored it, steering by the memory of the shipping containers. The van smashed through a chain-link fence, sparks showering the windshield like 4th of July pyrotechnics. We need a place to go, Elias, Ava yelled, dodging a stack of pallets. Somewhere off the grid, somewhere they can't see us from a satellite. The tunnels, Elias coughed, clutching his chest seal. The old, underground city, entrance at, first and post. If we get beneath the concrete, the signal dies. Ava swung the van onto First Avenue. Behind them, 2 sets of headlights turned the corner in perfect synchronization. The cleaners were closing the gap. Hold on, Ava roared. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was the pilot of a life raft in a sea of sharks, and she was going to drive this van into the heart of the earth if it meant keeping Table 6 alive. We didn't just go off the grid, we went under it. In the tunnels of the old Seattle Underground, there are no cameras, no cell towers, and no rules. I was operating on a dying SEAL in the dark, using a flashlight held by an accountant who was 1 heartbeat away from a breakdown. But the cleaners weren't far behind, and they didn't need a signal to find us. They just had to follow the trail of blood. The van skidded into the subterranean loading bay of a condemned warehouse at First and Post. Ava killed the engine, and for a moment, the silence was more deafening than the gunfire. Then, the rhythmic glug-glug of the water-seal drainage system reminded her that the clock was still ticking. "Greg, get the door," Ava whispered. "Elias, can you walk?" "I can crawl through glass. If I have to," Elias grunted. His skin was the color of wet ash, but his eyes were burning with a terrifying, feverish light. They moved like shadows. Ava draped Elias' massive arm over her shoulder, her small frame straining under the weight of 300 pounds of tactical muscle. Greg carried the water jug, terrified that a single stumble would pull the tube from Elias' chest. They slipped through a rusted iron gate and descended a crumbling staircase into the Seattle underground. The air down here was thick with the scent of damp earth, rot, and history. Brick arches stretched into the gloom, supported by rotting timbers. This was a labyrinth of vaulted storefronts and hollow sidewalks from the 1800s, a place where the city's secrets came to sleep. "In here," Elias wheezed, pointing toward a heavy steel door that looked like it belonged to an old bank vault. It was a Cold War-era fallout shelter, repurposed and hidden behind a false brick wall. Elias punched a code into a keypad that looked 30 years old. The door hissed open. Inside was a Spartan room, a cot, a shortwave radio, and crates of medical supplies that were probably older than Ava. "Lay him down," Ava commanded. She immediately went to work. The pen tube had done its job, but the site was beginning to show signs of infection. She needed to do a proper closure. She found a suture kit in one of the crates. The needles were slightly oxidized, but the silk was strong. "Greg, hold the flashlight steady. If you shake, I stitch his lung." Ava began to work. She was debriding the wound with surgical precision, her hands moving in the dim light like a weaver. "Tell me about Ares, Elias. Why is a general trying to kill you in a steakhouse?" Elias stared at the ceiling, his breath coming in ragged, shallow whistles. Ares was supposed to be a defensive drone AI, but they modified the code. It wasn't for defense, it was for preemptive neutralization. They were selling the kill switches to private contractors. My team found the ledger in a raid in Yemen. We thought we were bringing home proof of treason. We didn't know the general was the one who signed the invoice. "And the team?" Ava asked, her needle piercing his skin. "Ambushed at the extraction point. I'm the only one who made it to the water." Suddenly, a faint clink echoed from the tunnel outside. It was the sound of a boot hitting a loose brick. Ava froze. Greg's hand shook so violently, the light danced across the walls like a panicked moth. "They're here," Elias whispered. He reached under the cot and pulled out a heavy, matte black Pelican case. He flipped the latches. Inside wasn't a gun. It was a high-frequency satellite uplink, a device designed to pierce through concrete and interference. "The upload isn't finished," Elias said. "The thumb drive you have, it's the decryption key. If I don't plug it in and hit send from this terminal, the files stay dark, and the general stays in power." "How did they find us so fast?" Greg whimpered. Elias looked at his own shoulder, at the star-shaped bullet wound. "Subdermal tracker, they must have tagged me during the ambush. I thought it was just shrapnel." Ava looked at the scar. She could see a tiny, unnatural bump beneath the skin. "I have to cut it out." "No time," Elias said, his voice hardening. "They're at the door. Ava, listen to me. If I don't make it, you take the drive. You run toward the waterfront. There's a boat. The Night Witch." Thoom! The steel door groaned as a breaching charge detonated on the other side. The hinges held, but dust rained from the ceiling. "Greg, get behind the crates," Ava yelled. She didn't grab a gun. She grabbed the bottle of medical-grade ether she'd found in the supply crate. She looked at the ventilation shaft above the door. Elias, start the upload. Elias sat up, his face a mask of agony as he jammed the thumb drive into the uplink. The screen flickered to life. Upload resuming, 64%, 65%. Outside, a voice boomed, the voice of Viper. Elias, you're a hard man to kill, but the girl, the accountant, they don't have to die for your pride. Give us the drive and they walk. He's lying, Ava shouted. She climbed onto a crate, reaching for the vent. She poured the ether into a rag and stuffed it into the intake fan that pulled air from the hallway into the room. If they tried to burn their way in, they'd be breathing in an anesthetic cloud. Thoom! The second charge blew the door off its top hinge. The steel slab tilted dangerously. A silhouette appeared in the gap. Viper, wearing a gas mask, his suppressed rifle leveled at Elias' head. End of the road, Thorne. Ava didn't hesitate. She threw the heavy glass bottle of ether directly at the floor beneath the tilted door. The glass shattered, and the highly volatile liquid turned into a choking gas. Cover your faces, Ava screamed. As Viper stepped into the room, he stepped into a trap. The ether interacted with the heat from the breaching charge. A flash of blue flame erupted, not an explosion, but a sudden, oxygen-starving whoosh that sent the cleaners stumbling back into the tunnel, coughing and blinded. Elias' fingers flew across the keyboard. 88%, 89%. Hold them off, Ava, Elias roared. 10 more seconds. Viper recovered, kicking the door wide. He raised his rifle, his eyes locking onto the progress bar on the screen. He ignored Ava. He ignored Greg. He aimed for the satellite uplink. No, Ava lunged. A bullet can stop a heart, but it can't stop a signal once it hits the sky. As Viper leveled his rifle at the man I had just pulled back from the grave, I didn't think about my nursing license or the do-no-harm oath. I thought about the steak knife in my hand. In the tunnels beneath Seattle, the line between healer and hunter didn't just blur, it vanished. And the general's secrets were about to be paid for in blood. Viper stepped through the mangled steel door, his gas mask making him look like a giant, glass-eyed insect. The suppressed barrel of his rifle was a finger of death, pointing straight at the satellite uplink. Elias Thorne was hunched over the keyboard, his face slick with sweat, his fingers flying in a blur of desperation. 92%, 93%. Step away from the terminal, Thorne. Viper's voice was muffled but cold. The girl dies first, then the accountant. You get to watch the collateral damage before I put one in your brain. Ava felt a surge of cold fury that eclipsed her fear. She was a nurse. She spent her life fighting a different kind of reaper, but the stakes were always the same. Life or death, presence or absence. She looked at Greg, who was curled into a ball behind a crate of rusted iron rations. Then she looked at the ether-soaked floor. Elias now, Ava screamed. She didn't run at Viper. She kicked the heavy, metal medical tray she had been using. It skidded across the floor, its legs catching on the uneven stone, flipping it directly into Viper's shins. Viper flinched, a momentary lapse in a lifetime of professional killing. It was all the opening Ava needed. She grabbed a heavy, glass IV bottle of saline from the crate and hurled it with every ounce of strength she possessed. The bottle shattered against Viper's tactical vest, drenching him. At the same moment, Ava grabbed the flare gun Elias had left on the cot. 96%, 97%. Ava, no, Elias roared, but his hands never left the keys. Viper recovered, his rifle swinging toward Ava. He pulled the trigger. Thip-thip. 2 rounds punched into the brickwork inches from her head, showering her hair with red dust. Ava didn't blink. She squeezed the trigger of the flare gun. A blinding white-hot magnesium star erupted from the barrel. It didn't hit Viper, it hit the ether-saturated air and the saline-soaked floor. The room didn't explode, but it turned into a furnace of white light and searing heat. The high-oxygen environment of the old fallout shelter turned the air into a weapon. Viper screamed as the magnesium flare ignited the chemicals on his gear. He stumbled back into the hallway, his tactical suit smoldering. "Greg, the door!" Ava yelled, grabbing the heavy iron handle of the secondary security gate. Greg, spurred by a sudden, primal need to survive, bolted forward. Together, they slammed the secondary gate shut just as a second, cleaner, reached the threshold. The iron bars groaned as the men on the other side threw their weight against it. "Elias, is it done?" Ava turned, her chest heaving, her scrubs scorched at the sleeves. Elias Thorne didn't look up. He was staring at the screen, the blue light reflected in his steel-blue eyes. 99%. The bar hung there, the spinning wheel of death that haunted every computer user in the world was now the only thing standing between justice and a shallow grave. Outside the gate, the sounds of suppressed gunfire began to chew through the lock. Clang, clang, clang. "Come on, you bastard. Fly," Elias whispered. 100%. Upload complete. Encryption keys sent to DOJ Internal Affairs, Washington Post, Seattle PD Homicide. Elias slumped back against the brick wall, the effort finally draining the last of his reserves. The water-seal jug bubbled frantically. The ballpoint pen in his chest was still there, a plastic monument to a nurse's refusal to let a soldier die. "It's out," Elias rasped. "The Ares ledger, the missile coordinates, the general's offshore accounts. It's all in the wild now. They can kill us, but they can't kill the signal." The gate lock shattered. The iron bars swung open. Viper stepped in, his mask discarded, his face a mess of red burns and raw fury. He didn't have his rifle anymore. It had jammed in the heat. He held a combat knife with a serrated edge, the kind of blade designed to leave a wound that never closes. "The signal doesn't matter if you aren't alive to testify," Viper hissed. He looked at Ava. "You should have stayed at the hospital, nurse. You're a long way from the ICU." Ava stood her ground, her hand gripping the scalpel she'd used to debride Elias' wound. She felt the weight of the man behind her, the man she'd saved twice in one night. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Ava said, her voice dropping to a dangerous low frequency. "And you're out of time." From the tunnels above, a new sound began to echo. It wasn't the suppressed thip of the cleaners' guns. It was the heavy, rhythmic thrum of rotors. It was the screech of tires on the pavement 4 stories above. And then, a sound that made Viper freeze in his tracks. The piercing, multi-tonal wail of federal sirens, the real ones. "The DOJ received the files," Elias smirked, blood staining his teeth, "and they brought the cavalry." Viper looked at the door, then at Elias, then at Ava. He saw the defiance in her eyes. He saw the man who had survived the impossible. He realized the package at table 6 had just become the most protected witness in United States history. Viper backed away into the shadows of the tunnel just as the first flashbang detonated in the hallway, filling the catacombs with the thunder of the law. Most people think the story ends when the sirens arrive, but for us, the real battle was just beginning. Behind the glass of a high-security ward, I watched the man I saved become a legend, and I became a ghost. Table 6 was a million miles away, but the secret we shared was a bond written in blood and plastic. This is how the war ends and how a new one begins. The sun rose over Seattle, but it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like a postscript. Ava sat on a cold metal bench in the hallway of a military hospital, that didn't exist on any map. Her hands were finally clean, the blood of Elias Thorne scrubbed from her cuticles, but she could still feel the vibration of the van's steering wheel in her bones. She was still wearing the same scorched sweater, now covered by a sterile hospital gown. The cleaners were gone. Viper had been intercepted in the tunnels, and by midnight, the general had been taken into custody at his Virginia estate, caught in a web of digital evidence that couldn't be erased. The Ares project was dead. The heavy door at the end of the hall opened. A man in a sharp black suit, the real kind, with a badge that carried the weight of the Department of Justice, walked toward her. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice respectful, "the surgeons just finished. They replaced your ballpoint pen with a titanium chest tube. They said they've never seen anything like it. You saved his life, not once but 3 times." "Is he awake?" Ava asked, her voice cracking. "He's asking for his nurse." Ava entered the room. It was filled with more technology than her ICU back at Providence. Elias Thorne lay in the center of it, looking smaller than he had on the restaurant floor, but his eyes were still those piercing, steel-blue lanterns. He looked at her, and for the first time, the predator was gone. There was only a man. "Table 6, he rasped, the ventilator tube having been removed only an hour prior. Ava sat by his bed, her hand instinctively reaching for his pulse. It was strong, rhythmic, real. "You're a terrible patient, Elias. You move too much." Elias let out a dry, shaky breath that was almost a laugh. "And you're a terrible date. You brought a knife to dinner." He looked at the stitches in his chest, then back at her. "They told me the upload went through, all of it. The guys, my team, they'll get their names on the wall now, because of you." "I just didn't want to see another person code on my watch," Ava said softly. "You did more than that, Ava. You stood in the fire." He reached out, his hand covering hers. It was warm now. "The DOJ is going to offer you witness protection. They'll give you a new name, a new city, a life where no one knows you can perform surgery with a pen." Ava looked out the window at the Seattle skyline. She thought about her sister, about her quiet life, about the phantom beeping of the monitors. She realized she didn't want to go back to the way things were. The woman who walked into Miller's chop house was dead. The woman sitting here was a survivor. "I don't want a new name," Ava said, looking him in the eye. "I like the one I have, but I think I'm done with the ICU." Elias squeezed her hand. "Good, because I'm going to need a partner, someone who knows how to handle a getaway van, and someone who knows how to keep a heart beating when the world tries to stop it." 6 months later, the headlines had faded. The general was in a maximum security prison, and the Ares scandal was a footnote in a history book. In a small coastal town in Maine, a woman named Ava sat in a small diner overlooking the Atlantic. The door opened, and a tall man with a slight limp and a dark Henley walked in. He sat down across from her. There were no candles, no expensive wine, just the smell of salt air and cheap coffee. The waitress came over, looking bored. "What can I get you too?" Elias looked at Ava, a mischievous glint in his eyes. He looked at the table, set with simple white plastic forks and knives. "I'll have the steak," Elias said, "but do me a favor, bring it out pre-cut. I've had enough of knives for one lifetime." Ava laughed, a real, vibrant sound that chased away the last of the ghosts. She reached across the table, her fingers tracing the faint scar on Elias' wrist where he had once held her captive in his delirium. Now he held her by choice. "Table 6, she whispered. "Table 6, he replied, "the best date I ever had." Most of us think we know what we would do in an emergency. We think we'd be the hero. But when the man at the next table collapses and the cleaners come through the door, would you have the courage to pick up a pen and perform surgery? Would you have the guts to drive the getaway car? Ava Sterling didn't have special ops training. She just had an oath to help those in need, and she refused to break it, even when a gun was pointed at her head. This story reminds us that heroes aren't just the guys with the tridents on their uniforms. Sometimes they're the nurses who refuse to clock out. If this story kept your heart racing until the very last word, smash that like button right now. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a dramatic narration. And tell me in the comments, if you were Ava, would you have stayed in that van, or would you have run for the hills? Your choice defines your story. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe in the shadows.